to start by saying that I'm not part of the story. I'm just a detective who stumbled across more than my fair share of strange cases over the years. What I'm about to tell you is one of the most unsettling ones. 2 years ago, I was going through a storage unit, part of a routine investigation, when I found a GoPro. When I took it home and watched the footage, it didn't take long for me to realize something was very wrong. After just 10 minutes, I brought it to the station. A few colleagues and I watched the entire video, and then we got to work. But now I'm hoping someone out there can help me make sense of it all. Here's what was on the video. It starts with a shaky view of the ground. Then the GoPro gets strapped onto someone's head. The first voice you hear is Mark's. How does it look? He's looking around at 7 people sitting around a campfire in the woods. Stupid, Frank grumbles. Margaret, the leader of this group, steps in. Frank, please try to be nice. She waves her hand to get everyone's attention. Now that we're all settled in, the fire's going, why don't we go around and introduce ourselves? Let's say why we're here. Mark, you go first, and we'll move right around the circle. Mark gives a slight nod and starts. Sure. Hi, I'm Mark. I'm here to meet new people and become more social. He glances to his right. Sitting next to him is a guy in his early 20s. Tall, blonde, muscular. The guy introduces himself. Hello everyone, my name's Daniel. I've known Margaret for a while and I'm here to help her out with this group. Next up is Frank, the one with the attitude. He sits there with his arms crossed, staring into the fire. I'm Frank, he mutters. Margaret, with her calm demeanor, gives him a soft nudge. Frank, he sighs and shifts uncomfortably. I'm here to deal with my anger. Beside him sits a frail, pale woman, younger than Daniel. She's on edge, looking down at the ground. I'm Emma, she whispers. I'm here to move on from the last 2 years. Her voice barely carries, like she's afraid to be heard. Then there's Jacob, a large, bearded man. Hey, I'm Jacob. Been sober for a year now, thanks to Margaret. This is my first time doing something like this, camping with a support group. The group gives him a supportive round of applause, except Frank, who scoffs. Mia introduces herself next. She's in her mid-40s, covered in tattoos, and has a sharpness about her. I'm Mia. I'm here to work on myself. Get more, take less. She gives a slight shrug. Lastly, there's Liam, a young guy around Daniel's age but shorter, maybe 5'6". His dark hair is messy and he seems out of place. Hey, I'm Liam. And, I'm just trying to get out of this system. Maybe find a job or something, he mumbles. Margaret smiles warmly. Great, that's everyone. Thank you all for coming. I'm sure this will be an experience that'll change your lives. There's a brief pause as Margaret suggests they all talk for a few minutes. The camera shakes a bit as Mark switches off the GoPro, then it cuts back on later. It's about 4:30 in the video now, when Margaret stands up and says, I'll be right back. She walks over to the van they arrived in, leaving the group by the fire. Mark breaks the silence. Anyone got any good scary stories? Daniel jumps at the chance. Yeah, I've got one. It's about a group of people then, but Frank cuts him off. Yeah, we all know how this goes. Let me tell a real, scary story. Daniel sighs as Frank stands up to tell his tale. While Frank is getting into a story, Margaret returns from the van with flashlights, handing them out to the group. Daniel scoots his chair closer to Mark and Margaret. Daniel leans in and says, It's good to see you in better spirits, Margaret. I know it's been rough since your husband left. Margaret's smile falters slightly. Yeah, let's not talk about that right now, okay? Daniel nods and they go back to chatting while Frank continues the story. About 2 minutes later, Margaret interrupts the group again. Okay, that's enough for now. I've set up a scavenger hunt for us. I hid flags around the area yesterday and you'll need these flashlights to find them. You'll be paired off. Sorry if you're stuck with me. Jacob raises his hand. I don't want to go wandering in the woods in the dark. Frank chuckles darkly. Did my story scare you? Jacob shakes his head. No, I just don't feel like wandering around for who knows how long in the dark. Mia seems excited. I think it sounds fun. I bet I could find more flags than anyone. Emma speaks up, voice shaky. I don't want to do this either. Margaret frowns. I should have mentioned it earlier. Let's take a vote. Who doesn't want to go? Most of the group, except Mark, Mia, and Daniel, raise their hands. What happens next, though, is where everything changes. The group starts to argue about whether or not they should do the scavenger hunt. They're talking over each other, not paying attention to their surroundings. Frank suddenly goes silent, staring behind Margaret. Everyone else notices too. 5 people are walking towards them from the woods. They're all wearing suits and blank white plastic masks. The suits look expensive, but the masks cheap, almost as if they were thrown together last minute. The tallest one stands in the middle, towering over the rest. His suit jacket tied around his waist, revealing muscular arms covered in scars. The other 4 are shorter, around 6 feet tall. Following behind him in eerie synchronization, Frank speaks up, his voice full of anger. What the hell do you want? The tall man steps forward. Margaret turns around to see them, confused, and before anyone can react, the tall man speaks in a deep, muffled voice. Lives. And just like that, he pulls out a machete, and in one swift motion, he swings. Margaret's head flies off her body, rolling into the fire pit. Her head catches fire as her body collapses lifeless. The group is frozen in shock. No one knows what to do. Frank is the first to react. Run, he screams, bolting into the woods. Everyone follows behind him in sheer panic, not even looking back to see if the masked figures are chasing them. Frank yells for everyone to run, and they do, scrambling through the woods, branches snapping under their feet. The GoPro shows Mark glancing back a few times. The 5 masked figures don't seem to be following. They just stand there, watching. About 12 minutes into the footage, the group slows down. Frank, Daniel, and Mia are ahead, with the others lagging behind. Jacob is the last to catch up, breathing heavily. Frank is furious. What the hell was that? Daniel, trying to stay calm, speaks up. We need to make a plan. We can't just keep running blindly. Mia, out of breath but still focused, agrees. Yeah, we should keep moving. Put more distance between us and them while we can. Emma's voice shakes. And what if they're still following us? Frank snaps. Then we keep running. That's the plan. Daniel shakes his head. No, not everyone can keep up. We need to stay together. Frank is visibly frustrated. I hate that I'm about to say this, but fine. We're better off staying as a group. Mia sighs, visibly annoyed. We should keep going. We can't stay here. Mark, still catching his breath, points out. I didn't see them following us. They stayed where they were when we ran. Daniel takes charge. From now on, only one flashlight on at a time. We need to stay as quiet as possible, and we'll follow me. Frank bristles at the suggestion. No, we follow me. I'm not taking orders from some goody-goody. Daniel doesn't engage. We don't have time for this. Who wants to follow me? Everyone but Frank raises their hand. Liam, looking nervous, speaks up. Hold on a second. This doesn't add up. Think about it. Margaret said something weird before all this. Something about how this would change our lives, and then she wanted us to split into pairs and go into the woods right before the guy showed up. Does anyone else find that suspicious? The group falls silent, the reality of his words sinking in. Daniel's voice tightens. Don't talk about Margaret like that. I won't tolerate any slander. Liam presses further. Oh yeah? Then tell us. Why did her husband leave her? I overheard you talking about it. Emma, clearly shocked, turns to Daniel. Wait, what? Jacob, wanting to move on, mutters. We need to leave, now. But Frank steps in front of Daniel, grinning slightly. Hold on. Liam's bringing up some interesting points, don't you think? Mark, catching on, agrees reluctantly. It does sound weird when you put it like that. Daniel's getting defensive now. What are you even suggesting? Her head got chopped off, for God's sake. What's your point? Liam, his voice growing more insistent, says, maybe it was a setup. Maybe she wanted us dead, too. Daniel, on the verge of losing it, snaps back. That's insane. Why would she want us dead? I've known her for years. She would never do something like that. Liam fires back. Then explain her strange words and the timing. Why did she split us up right before those people showed up? Suddenly, the sound of footsteps in the distance silences them all. Jacob, holding his flashlight, sweeps the light across the woods. Did you guys hear that? He asks, his voice barely above a whisper. Mark glances over his shoulder. He can barely make out shapes moving between the trees. Frank yells, Come on, run with me! The group bolts again, their flashlights swinging wildly as they dash through the underbrush. The GoPro shows Mark looking back, but this time, the masked men are following, walking slowly but steadily, never hurrying, as if they know exactly where the group is headed. By the time they stop running again, it's nearly 17 minutes into the footage. Everyone is panting, trying to catch their breath. The tension is palpable. The woods are eerily quiet, except for the occasional crack of a twig underfoot. Frank is the first to speak. You're messing with us. Daniel, clearly shaken, nods. They've split up. We don't know how many there are anymore. Frank glares at Mark, noticing the GoPro still strapped to his head. How is that thing still on? Toss it already. Mark blinks, caught off guard. Right, I forgot about it. Daniel steps in. No, keep it on. We might capture something important. Maybe one of their faces. Liam, suddenly suspicious, asks, Why did you bring that thing in the first place? Mark hesitates for a second. Margaret asked me to. She wanted me to film the trip, make a little video to remember it. The group stares at him, realization dawning. Emma, her voice trembling, says, Oh, God. Liam was right, wasn't he? Daniel, say something. Daniel looks away, unable to meet their eyes. Before he can respond, a loud metallic snap cuts through the night, followed by Liam screams. The GoPro turns to show Liam caught in a bear trap, his leg crushed in the metal jaws. Get this thing off me! Liam screams, thrashing in pain. The group rushes over, trying to pry the trap open, but it's no use. They can't get it to budge. Daniel, still limping from his earlier wound, tries to rally the group. "Come on, everyone, we can do this." Emma, panicked, steps back. "Shit," she cries, stumbling as she falls. Just then, footsteps echo through the woods, growing closer. Mark looks up and sees one of the masked men rushing towards Jacob. Knife raised. Jacob barely manages to block the first slash with his arm, the blade cutting deep. The group erupts in chaos. Frank and Daniel tackle the man, but another one rushes in, driving a knife into Daniel's leg. The scene turns into a desperate struggle. Frank grabs the attacker's knife and plunges it into his neck, blood gushing as he continues stabbing, muttering under his breath, You. Daniel is coughing, clutching his leg, while Mark and Jacob try to hold the man down. Frank doesn't stop until the attacker's head is completely severed, the plastic mask still covering his face. Liam is screaming in pain from the bear trap, and as the group finally frees him, footsteps approach from all sides. They know they're not alone. Jacob mutters, "You're just playing with us." Frank nods, his voice grim. "Yeah, they're fucking enjoying it." Mark glances at Daniel, who's still bleeding from his leg. "You okay?" Daniel gives a weak nod. "I'll manage. Let's keep moving." They press on, stumbling through the woods. It's dark and the constant sound of footsteps following them keeps their nerves on edge. But then, without warning, an arrow whistles through the air and strikes Liam in the head, pinning him to the tree where he had been resting. Panic sets in again. "Shit, they're still here." The masked figures are now closing in from all sides. One stands just a few feet away, bow in hand, watching them with eerie calm. The group tries to move faster, but they're exhausted, and every time they stop to rest, the figures get closer. About 39 minutes into the video, they reach a steep hill. Mia suddenly reappears, rushing down from the top and slamming into one of the masked men, bashing his head with a rock until his mask shatters. The group is stunned. Frank shouts, "Where the hell did you come from?" Mia barely glances at him. "Up the hill. I've been keeping my distance, but now I had to act." Daniel, breathless and hurt, demands, "Why didn't you help us earlier?" Mia shrugs. "I was looking out for myself. I wasn't taking any chances." Frank growls, "That's messed up, but I get it." They make their way up the steep hill, panting and stumbling. By the time they reach the top, everyone is exhausted. The GoPro catches the distant figures of the 3 remaining masked men standing at the bottom, looking up at them. Frank spits in their direction. "Look at that big bastard down there." Mark collapses to the ground, sitting in silence as the others catch their breath. Jacob stands near Mia, who's leaning against a tree, and Emma looks like she's ready to collapse herself. Mia wipes the sweat from her brow. "Keep an eye on them. If they start moving, we run." The group watches the masked men at a distance, unmoving, still as statues. Mark, still shaken, turns to Daniel. "So, Daniel, have you thought more about what Liam said before? You know?" Daniel sighs heavily, leaning against a tree, clearly worn out from the chase and the blood loss. "Yeah, I've thought about it." Frank presses him. "And what's your take?" Daniel's voice wavers. "I don't think Margaret had anything to do with this. I can't see her being part of something this messed up. She cared about helping people." Mark lets out a sigh of relief, but doesn't seem fully convinced. "Okay. Maybe it doesn't matter right now. Can you at least tell us what happened with her husband? Why did he leave her?" Daniel hesitates, but with everything happening, he finally gives in. He left her for a younger sister. Her sister's a doctor, successful, beautiful. Margaret always felt overshadowed, like her sister had it easier. But that doesn't mean she'd have anything to do with this. She was trying to help people, not hurt them. Frank scoffs. Maybe she needed help herself. There's a brief, uneasy silence before Daniel speaks again. Whatever happened, we can't just stay here. They aren't moving, but it's like another game to them. They're watching us, waiting for something. Frank looks down the hill at the masked men. Yeah, it's a game, all right. I just keep thinking maybe we should have attacked them the moment they showed up. We might have had a better chance of killing them then. Now we're just sitting ducks. Daniel frowns. We didn't know what they were going to do. We couldn't have known. Frank shakes his head, his voice hard. You sound different now, Daniel. A minute ago, you didn't want to hurt anyone, but now you're talking about killing them. Daniel looks off into the distance, his voice low. They're not human. They're monsters. Frank lets out a bitter laugh. No, Daniel. They're worse. They're men. That's what makes this even more terrifying. Daniel doesn't respond to that. Instead, he looks up at the sky for a moment and then mutters, Frank, I hope you can find a way to move on from your anger. God will forgive you. Frank says nothing for a while, then asks quietly, You think there's an afterlife? Daniel nods. Yeah. Frank sighs deeply. I hope so. Without warning, Frank suddenly grabs Daniel and shoves him. Everyone run! Before anyone can react, Frank jumps down the hill, charging straight towards the masked men. Mark stares in disbelief, and so does the rest of the group. Shit, he just took off! Mark yells. Daniel, trying to steady himself, grimaces in pain. We gotta go! He's giving us time! Emma and Mia are already running, leaving Mark to help Jacob and Daniel. Jacob can barely move at this point, his body exhausted and weakened from the chase. Jacob, come on! We gotta move! Mark throws an arm around Jacob to support him. Jacob is panting, his voice barely a whisper. You should leave me behind. I'm slowing you down. Daniel, struggling to keep up, shakes his head. We're not leaving anyone. But Jacob is insistent. You two should go. The girls are so far ahead and we're just sitting targets back here. Mark looks torn but refuses to abandon him. We're not leaving you behind. Mia and Emma suddenly reappear, running back toward the group. Mia shouts, If you want to live, you need to move faster. Jacob, sensing the urgency, tries to pick up the pace. Maybe we should split up. Each of us run in a different direction. It'd make it harder for them to find us. Emma considers it. It's not a bad idea. But Daniel, despite his injuries, shakes his head. No, they know these woods better than we do. Splitting up won't help. Jacob mutters under his breath. Maybe Frank killed them all for us by now. Daniel falters at that moment, but keeps moving. Frank didn't have to do that. But I hope he made it. Jacob forces a weak smile. Yeah, I kinda wanted to hear the rest of this scary story. They share a quiet, ironic laugh. But then Mark stops, looking into the trees, his breath catching in his throat. Daniel, noticing his sudden halt, turns. Mark? What is it? Mark points into the dark woods. There, he whispers. There, about 20 feet away, stands one of the masked men, the one with the bow. His eerie white mask glows faintly in the moonlight. Jacob curses under his breath. Off. Daniel sighs, his exhaustion seeping into his voice. I guess they've been following us the whole time. The two girls join them, looking in the same direction. Mia is the first to react.
Shit, so what now? Are we just going to stand here and stare at him?
Mark, glancing around, realizes something else. Wait, if he's here, where's the other one? He looks back into the woods, scanning for any sign of movement, but he can't see the tall man. Mia shrugs, trying to stay calm.
Maybe Frank killed him.
Jacob, still suspicious, mutters.
Maybe the tall guy is after Frank right now.
Mark shakes his head, determination settling in. Enough running. Mia looks at him incredulously.
Are you serious?
Mark nods firmly. Yeah. There's only two of them left, right? We can take them. Daniel, still leaning heavily on a tree, looks doubtful.
I don't know how much I can help. I'm bleeding out.
Jacob, wiping the sweat from his brow, speaks up.
I'm in.
Emma stands quietly beside Mia, who seems hesitant but doesn't argue. Mark steps forward, addressing the masked man with the bow.
Come here, you piece of shit.
The masked figure tilts his head, almost as if amused, and begins walking toward the group, calmly tossing his bow and an arrow to the ground. Mark rushes to pick them up, fumbling with the bowstring. But when he lets the arrow fly, it sails far off course.
Damn.
Mark curses under his breath. The masked man shrugs and picks up the knife from his belt. As he steps closer, the group races for what's to come. But just as the fight is about to break out, something happens. Behind them, a loud thud echoes through the forest.
Daniel!
Emma shouts, turning around to see him stumbling to the ground. The blood loss has finally caught up to him. Mark rushes to help, but the masked man with the knife is already too close. Jacob and Mia charge at him, with Jacob taking a hit to the arm as he wraps his arms around the masked man's waist. Mia starts punching at his face, but the masked figure is stronger than expected, swinging wildly with the knife, catching Jacob in the side multiple times.
Jacob!
Mark yells, running to his side, grabbing the masked man's arm as Mia continues her assault. With Jacob bleeding heavily and collapsing onto the masked man, they pushed him to the ground, but he continues to thrash and stab at anyone within reach. In the chaos, the masked man gets the upper hand, flipping Mark onto his back. The GoPro captures the moment he raised the knife to strike down on Mark. But just before the blade hits, Daniel tackles the masked man from the side, knocking him off balance. Emma rushes to help Mark up as the others piled on the masked man, struggling to disarm him. Mia finally manages to wrestle the knife from him, and in a frenzy, begins stabbing him relentlessly, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The man lets out a few gurgled grunts before going limp. Breathing heavily, Mia stands over the body. Let's see what he had on him, she mutters, searching his pockets. Mark, still in shock, stares at Daniel, who's barely able to stand. Daniel, thank you. You saved me. Daniel gives a weak nod, blood dripping from his leg. Don't mention it. Mia pulls out a wallet from the masked man's jacket and flips it open. Her face twists in disgust. What the hell? She throws the wallet to the ground, scattering its contents. It's filled with nothing but Monopoly money. Mark stares in disbelief. What the? Before anyone can process it, they hear a sickening sound behind them. A hacking, chopping noise.
No!
Mark and Daniel both scream. They turn to see the tall masked man, standing over Jacob's lifeless body. Hacking away with a machete, blood is everywhere. The sound of metal hitting bone is all they can hear. The tall man slowly looks up at the group, his face expressionless behind the mask. He breathes heavily, his body looming over Jacob's butchered corpse. Then, without hesitation, He throws the machete, and it spins through the air, hitting Emma directly in the head. Her body twitches violently before collapsing, lifeless, onto the forest floor. Mia screams in rage and charges at the tall man with her knife, but he grabs her by the neck, lifting her off the ground as if she weighs nothing. She kicks and swings wildly, but he doesn't flinch. Daniel tries to rush over to help, but the tall man kicks him in the chest, sending him sprawling onto the ground. Mark runs to Daniel's side, helping him up as the GoPro captures the last moments of Mia, gasping for air before going limp in the man's grip. The tall man drops Mia's lifeless body at his feet, turning his gaze toward Mark and Daniel. Mark's heart is pounding, his breath ragged. He glances at Daniel, who's barely conscious from blood loss. The tall masked man stands just a few feet away, towering over them, Mia's lifeless body at his feet. Mark stammers, "I'm so sorry, Mia." He hoists Daniel up, trying to move as quickly as possible. The tall man doesn't follow, he just stands there, watching them with an eerie calm. Blood stains his white tank top, but his cold, blank mask betrays no emotion. Daniel, weak and fading, mutters, "We can't leave her." Mark shakes his head, desperation in his voice. "We don't have a choice. Come on, we need to keep going." Daniel's body stumbles, and he trips over a root, falling hard onto the ground. "I've lost too much blood. Mark, just stop." Mark bends down, trying to pull him up again. "No, we can make it. You're not giving up now." Daniel coughs, pushing Mark away gently. "You need to run. Don't turn back." Mark hesitates, torn between helping his friend and saving his own life. Daniel looks at him with pleading eyes and weakly motions for him to go. "Go, Mark. Get out of here." Mark backs up slowly, eyes wide with fear. "I'll make sure I get out. I promise." Daniel gives him a weak thumbs up before collapsing against a tree, too weak to move any further. Footsteps can be heard in the distance, echoing through the dark woods. With one final glance at Daniel, Mark turns and runs. He doesn't look back. The minutes that follow are a blur of panic and heavy breathing as the GoPro captures his frantic escape, weaving between trees and stumbling over roots. By the time Mark has run deep into the woods, it's nearly an hour into the footage. The only sounds are his ragged breath and the crunch of leaves underfoot. There's no sign of the masked men, but the fear keeps pushing him forward, further and further into the forest. Mark stumbles to a stop, panting, barely able to stand. He's exhausted. The GoPro catches his shaking hands as he looks around. He seems to be alone. His breathing slows for a moment as he listens. No footsteps. No masked men in sight. But then the silence breaks. There's a faint rustling sound nearby. Mark freezes, his eyes darting toward the noise. Slowly, he takes a step backward, his heart pounding so loudly that it drowns out the rest of the forest's quiet. Suddenly, a tall masked man emerges from the shadows, standing about 20 feet away. He isn't running. He's just walking. Slow, deliberate, as if he knows Mark has nowhere left to go. Mark's breath catches in his throat. "Shit, no, this can't be happening." The tall man takes another step forward, his heavy boots crunching the leaves. Mark stumbles backward, tripping over a fallen branch and falling hard onto his back. The GoPro shakes as he scrambles to his feet, trying to get away, but the tall man is already too close. Mark turns and runs again, but it's no use. His legs are too weak, his lungs burning from exhaustion. The tall man is relentless, his slow, steady pace never wavering. No matter how far Mark runs, the man is always there, closing the distance one step at a time. Mark makes one last desperate push, running as fast as he can through the trees. But he knows deep down that it's over. He can hear the man's footsteps behind him, getting closer and closer with every passing second. Suddenly, Mark trips, falling hard onto the ground. The GoPro captures his frantic movements as he tries to crawl forward, but his body is too tired. He collapses face pressed into the dirt, breathing heavily. The sound of footsteps stops. Mark slowly lifts his head, the GoPro catching the moment the tall man stands over him, machete in hand. Mark's breath hitches in his throat as he looks up into the blank white mask. There's no hesitation. The tall man raises the machete high above his head, and in one swift motion, brings it down. The screen goes black. That's where the footage ends. When we analyzed the video, there was no sign of the bodies, no sign of the masked men, no trace of what happened after. The storage unit where I found the GoPro was untouched. No clues, no leads. We investigated the area where the group had gone camping, but nothing. No evidence they were ever there. I'm telling you this now because I've hit a dead end. Maybe someone out there knows something. Maybe someone's seen these masked men or heard about another case like this. But for now, it's just a story. One that I can't explain. And it's not the kind of story that leaves you with answers.